The galaxy had long agreed on one truth. Humanity had never existed. Not as a civilization. Not as a species. Not even as a footnote in recorded history. They were nothing more than a story, an old, half-forgotten myth whispered in the quiet corners of ancient archives. A warning. A joke. A mistake. Among the elder races, the story varied in its details but never in its ending. There had once been a species, violent, relentless, impossibly resilient, that had risen too fast and burned too bright. A race that waged wars not for survival, but for dominance. A people who refused extinction even when the universe itself seemed to demand it. And then, they were gone. No ruins. No signals. No homeworld. No proof they had ever existed at all. Entire star systems had been mapped, excavated, and catalogued over millennia. Every advanced civilization had left something behind. Artifacts, ruins, echoes in the void. But not humanity. It was as if they had been erased. Not destroyed. Erased. That distinction mattered more than most were willing to admit. Because destruction left evidence. Erasure left questions. And the galaxy did not like questions it could not answer. So the Galactic Council did what it always did when faced with uncertainty. Buried the myth. Declared it fiction. Labeled humanity as a primitive legend from a less enlightened age. A story designed to frighten young diplomats and entertain bored historians. Never provoke a war you cannot win, the old saying went. Or you will end up like the humans. It became a metaphor. Nothing more. Over time, even that faded. The galaxy moved on. Empires expanded. Alliances formed and fractured. Wars were fought, won, and forgotten. New species rose to power, each one convinced they had reached the pinnacle of evolution, of technology, of control. They believed themselves untouchable. After all, there was no force left in the universe capable of challenging them. At least, that's what they thought. Because far beyond the mapped regions of known space, past the borders where exploration had slowed and ambition had waned, there were places the Council had chosen not to look. Regions marked as unstable, uncharted, irrelevant, dead zones where sensors failed and signals vanished without explanation. Places where even the most advanced probes returned nothing but silence. For centuries, those regions had remained untouched, ignored, avoided. But silence, like all things in the universe, was never truly empty. It waited. Sometimes. It listened. Deep within one such forgotten sector, something stirred. At first, it was nothing more than a fluctuation, an anomaly so small it barely registered against the background noise of space. A ripple in the fabric of reality itself, flickering in and out of existence like a dying signal. No alarms were triggered. No observers took notice. Why would they? The galaxy had grown comfortable in its certainty, arrogant in its dominance, blind in its belief that the past was buried for a reason. The anomaly grew. Slowly, quietly, deliberately. Energy signatures began to spike, impossible readings that defied known physics. Gravitational distortions twisted the surrounding space, bending light into unnatural shapes. Sensors that happened to pass near the region failed instantly, their data corrupted beyond recovery. Still, no one acted, because no one was watching. And then, it happened. The ripple became a fracture. The fracture became a wound. And the wound tore open. Not with an explosion, not with a flash, but with a silence so absolute it seemed to consume the stars around it. From that silence, something emerged. Not debris, not energy, but structure. Massive, angular, deliberate. The first ship drifted into real space like a shadow being cast across the universe itself. It did not resemble the elegant vessels of the Council races, nor the organic constructs of hive civilizations. This was something else. Something older. Something built not for beauty, but for war. Its surface was scarred, layered with the marks of countless battles. Impacts that had not been repaired, only endured. Its weapons were visible, unapologetic, designed with a single purpose: destruction. And it was not alone. More shapes followed. Dozens. Then hundreds. An entire fleet emerging from the tear in reality, each vessel identical in its brutality, its presence heavy with a kind of silent authority the galaxy had not felt in ages. No signals were broadcast. No warnings issued. No attempts at communication made. They simply arrived. And for a moment, just a moment, the universe held its breath. Because somewhere, buried beneath centuries of denial and forgotten history, an old fear began to resurface. A question the galaxy had long refused to ask. What if the myth had never been a myth? What if humanity had not been destroyed, but waiting? And if that was true, then the real question was no longer whether they had existed. It was why they had come back. Great, let's continue. Now we raise the stakes and introduce the unstoppable enemy. Long before the anomaly appeared, before the fracture in space, before the first human ship returned, the galaxy had already begun to fall. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where the stars went dark or the Council declared a state of emergency. No grand announcement. No unified response. Just silence. System after system stopped responding. At first, it was dismissed as technical failure. A collapsed relay network. A localized rebellion. Even piracy. That's how it always started. Explainable. Containable. But then the reports began to change. Colonies didn't just go silent, they vanished. Entire fleets sent to investigate failed to return. Trade routes that had remained stable for centuries were suddenly empty, their stations drifting lifeless in orbit. Automated defenses were found shattered, not disabled, obliterated with overwhelming force. And so, no enemy claimed responsibility. That was the most unsettling part. Wars in the galaxy had rules. Even the most brutal empires operated with purpose, territory, resources, power. This was different. This was systematic. Precise. Hungry. The first confirmed sighting came from the outer edges of Council-controlled space. A mining world, insignificant by most standards, broadcast a distress signal just before its network collapsed. The transmission was fragmented, chaotic. But one thing was clear. They weren't under attack. They were being erased. Witness accounts, those few who managed to escape, spoke of ships unlike anything previously catalogued. Massive warforms blotting out the sky, their hulls radiating heat signatures that distorted atmospheric readings. Weapons that didn't just destroy targets, but tore through them. Cities vanished in seconds. Orbitals shattered like glass. There was no negotiation. No demand. No warning. Only execution. The name came later. The Drek Dominion. No one knew where they came from. No one knew how long they had been watching. But by the time the Council acknowledged their existence, it was already too late. Within months, the Dominion had expanded across dozens of systems. Their strategy was terrifying in its simplicity: overwhelm, annihilate, advance. They did not occupy worlds. They did not rule populations. They removed them. Completely. The Council responded as it always had, with force. Joint fleets were assembled. Armadas composed of the most advanced warships ever created, crewed by species that had dominated the stars for millennia. They expected resistance. They expected losses. They did not expect defeat. The first engagement lasted less than an hour. The second, barely 20 minutes. By the third, the Council stopped broadcasting battle reports altogether. Because there was nothing left to report. Ships designed to withstand supernova-level impacts were torn apart in seconds. Shield systems failed under weapons that seemed to bypass energy fields entirely. Tactical formations collapsed before they could even be executed. The Drek did not adapt. They did not need to. They were already superior. Panic began to spread. Not publicly, never publicly, but within the private chambers of the Galactic Council, fear took root. Strategies were rewritten. Defensive protocols upgraded. Entire sectors were abandoned in an attempt to slow the Dominion's advance. It didn't work. Nothing worked. The Drek moved like a force of nature. Unstoppable, indifferent, inevitable. World by world, system by system, they advanced. And for the first time in recorded history, The galaxy had no answer. Some whispered that this was the end, that the great empires had grown too comfortable, too divided, too slow to react to a threat that did not follow their rules. Others believed something worse, that the Drek were not just conquerors, but the correction, a force meant to wipe the galaxy clean and start again. Even the most powerful species began to retreat inward, fortifying their core systems, abandoning their outer colonies without hesitation. Survival had replaced dominance. Fear had replaced control. And still, the Dominion came. Relentless. Unchallenged. Unstoppable. Until they reached Xanthar Prime. A world unlike the others. Strategically vital. Heavily fortified. A cornerstone of Council defense networks in the sector. If it fell, entire regions of space would be exposed. So the Council made its stand. Every available fleet was redirected. Every defense system activated. For the first time since the Dominion's emergence, the galaxy chose to fight. Not to win, but to survive. As the Drek Armada descended upon the system, the sky itself seemed to burn. Their warships filled the void, an endless tide of destruction blotting out the stars. Council forces engaged immediately. Energy beams lit up the darkness. Missiles tore through space. Defensive grids activated at full capacity. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like they might hold. Then the Drek advanced. And everything changed. Ships began to fall. Formations collapsed. Defense lines shattered. The same pattern. The same outcome. Inevitable. The Council's last stand was turning into another massacre. And this time, there would be no retreat. No reinforcements. No second chance. Xanthar Prime would fall. The galaxy knew it. The Council knew it. Even the soldiers fighting in orbit knew it. Because no one had ever stopped the Drek. No one had ever even slowed them. And no one dared to believe that could change. Until the sky broke. Now comes the most important phase. The moment that hooks viewers emotionally and makes them stay till the end. The sky didn't explode. It didn't burn, collapse, or shatter like the countless battlefields before it. It simply split. At first, no one understood what they were seeing. Amid the chaos of war, the blinding flashes of weapons fire, the debris of shattered fleets, the desperate transmissions flooding every channel, a distortion began to form above Xanthar Prime. Almost invisible. A thin line drawn across the fabric of space itself. For a fraction of a second, it looked like a sensor glitch. A failure in targeting systems. A trick of light. Then the line widened. And reality itself began to tear apart. The battlefield froze. Not because the fighting had stopped, but because something deeper, more instinctive, had taken hold. Even the Drek paused. The fracture stretched across the void, expanding rapidly, its edges glowing with an unnatural darkness that swallowed the surrounding starlight. Energy readings spiked beyond measurable limits. Gravitational waves rippled outward, throwing ships off course, disrupting weapons systems mid-fire. This was not technology. This was something else. Something impossible. And then, it opened. Not into fire. Not into light. But into nothing. A void so deep, so absolute, it seemed to erase existence itself. From that void, something moved. The first ship emerged slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the universe. It was massive. Larger than any known battleship in the Council's arsenal. But it wasn't its size that commanded attention. It was its presence. Where Council vessels were sleek, refined, built with precision and elegance. This ship was something entirely different. Angular. Layered. Scarred. Its hull bore the marks of war not as damage, but as history. Deep impact fractures, scorched plating, exposed structural reinforcements, all of it left untouched, as if repair had never been the intention. This was not a ship designed to look powerful. This was a ship that had survived power. More vessels followed. Dozens at first. Then hundreds. An entire fleet pouring out of the tear in space, each one identical in its brutal design, forming into perfect formation with mechanical precision. No wasted movement. No hesitation. No confusion. They didn't scan the battlefield. They didn't react to the chaos around them. They simply took position and waited. Across every channel, panic surged. Unknown fleet detected, no registry, no identification. Energy signatures off the scale. This isn't possible. Where did they come from? No one had answers. Not the council. Not the commanders. Not even the Drek. For the first time since their arrival, the Dominion hesitated. It was brief, barely noticeable, but it was there. Then they acted. A Drek warship, one of their forward assault carriers, rotated toward the newly arrived fleet. Its weapon systems charged instantly, plasma lances forming along its hull, glowing with destructive energy capable of vaporizing entire cities. To the Drek, this was no different than any other obstacle. Unknown, irrelevant, destined to be erased. They fired. The blast tore through space, a concentrated beam of annihilation aimed directly at the lead vessel of the unknown fleet. It struck. Direct hit. A perfect impact. For a moment, there was nothing. No explosion. No debris. Just silence. Then the energy dissipated. And the ship remained. Unmoved. Untouched. As if the attack had never happened at all. Across the battlefield, something shifted. Real fear. Not the calculated caution of military strategy. Not the controlled urgency of combat. But something deeper. Something instinctive. The kind of fear that came when reality stopped behaving the way it was supposed to. The unknown fleet did not retaliate immediately. They did not reposition. They did not raise shields or broadcast warnings. They simply absorbed the attack. And then, they responded. The lead ship moved first. A slow, deliberate adjustment in position. Its weapons activated, not with the elegant glow of energy systems, nor the refined precision of council technology, but with something far more primitive, far more brutal. Kinetic arrays. Mass drivers. Weapons built not to outclass an enemy, but to overwhelm it. There was no charge-up sequence. No visible energy build. Just a sudden, violent release. And then, the projectile crossed the distance between fleets in an instant, moving so fast it burned the space around it. It struck the Drek warship dead center. And the ship vanished. Not exploded. Not damaged. Erased. Its shields shattered on contact. Its hull collapsed inward. Its entire structure disintegrated into fragments so small they barely registered on sensors. Gone. In a single shot. Silence fell across the battlefield. Even the ongoing war seemed to pause, as if the universe itself needed a moment to understand what had just happened. A transmission. It cut through every frequency. Every system. Every language barrier. Undistorted. Unavoidable. A voice followed. Unshaken. Not loud. But absolute. We are human. The pause. Just long enough for the words to sink in. Just long enough for something ancient, something buried deep within the collective memory of the galaxy, to awaken. And then, we have returned. For a moment, no one moved. The words echoed across every channel, every ship, every mind that heard them. We are human. We have returned. It shouldn't have meant anything. To most of the galaxy, humanity was a myth, a story buried under centuries of denial. And yet, the reaction was instant. Recognition. Not logical. Not conscious. But something older. Something instinctive. Like a forgotten nightmare suddenly remembered. The Drek did not share that hesitation. They didn't fear legends. They didn't question the past. They only understood one thing. Eliminate the unknown. Their fleet surged forward. Hundreds of warships igniting their engines at once, flooding the battlefield with overwhelming force. Plasma lances charged, missile arrays deployed, gravitational weapons locking onto targets. If the unknown fleet had survived the first strike, they would not survive the second. The void lit up. Energy beams carved through space. Missiles screamed across the battlefield. Entire sections of the sky burned under the sheer intensity of the assault. It was everything the Drek had. Everything that had crushed empires. Everything that had made them unstoppable. And it all came crashing down on the human fleet. The impact was catastrophic. Explosions rippled across the void, overlapping shockwaves distorting the battlefield. Sensor arrays overloaded. Visual feeds collapsed into static. For several seconds, no one could see anything. No one could tell what had happened. Had the unknown fleet survived? Had they finally met something they couldn't endure? The answer came slowly. As the fire cleared, the ships were still there. Not retreating. Not damaged. Not even disrupted. They had taken the full force of the Drek Dominion's assault. And endured it. Completely. A ripple of disbelief spread across the battlefield. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nothing survived the Drek. Nothing endured that kind of firepower. Nothing. But these ships were not like anything the galaxy had ever seen. And then, they moved. Not in panic. Not in reaction. But with precision. The human fleet advanced as one. Perfect formation. Perfect timing. Every movement calculated. Every angle intentional. There was no chaos. No hesitation. No wasted motion. They didn't fight like the Council. They didn't fight like the Drek. They fought like a species that had done this before. And again. And again. Their weapons activated, not in bursts, not in desperation, but in controlled, measured sequences. One shot. One target. One kill. Kinetic rounds tore through space like meteors, each impact devastating beyond comprehension. Drek warships, built to withstand entire fleets, collapsed under single strikes. Shields shattered instantly. Hulls caved in as if crushed by invisible hands. There were no prolonged battles. No drawn-out exchanges. Every engagement ended the same way. Immediately, a Drek cruiser attempted to flank the formation. It was destroyed before it completed the maneuver. A carrier deployed its fighter swarms. They were wiped out before they reached firing range. A command ship activated its defensive grid. It lasted less than a second. The pattern became clear. Terrifyingly clear. The humans were not reacting to the battle. They were controlling it. Every move the Drek made, countered, predicted, neutralized. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling. Systematic. Efficient. Inevitable. Panic spread through the Dominion ranks. For the first time since their rise, they were losing. Not gradually. Not strategically. But completely. Their formations broke. Ships began to retreat. Commands turned into desperate signals. Coordination collapsed under pressure they had never experienced before. Because this was something new. Something they had never faced. An enemy that was stronger, faster, and worse. Smarter. The human fleet did not pursue recklessly. They didn't chase fleeing ships. They didn't waste resources. They advanced steadily, cutting through the battlefield like a blade, isolating targets, eliminating them with ruthless precision. There was no anger in their movements. No emotion. No hesitation. Just purpose. Cold. Unyielding. Final. Within minutes. The outcome was decided. Within hours. It was over. The Drek Dominion's assault force was gone. Not weakened. Not pushed back. Destroyed. Completely. What remained drifted in silence. Fragments of ships, broken hulls, lifeless debris scattered across the void like the remnants of a war that should never have been lost. Across the battlefield, the surviving Council forces held position. Stunned. Unable to move. Unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The impossible had happened. The unstoppable force had been stopped. And not just stopped. Erased. The human fleet came to a halt. Their formation tightening once more, weapons powering down in perfect synchronization. They did not celebrate. They did not communicate. They did not acknowledge the victory. They simply waited. As if the battle had never mattered. As if this was only the beginning. Then once again, the transmission returned. Unavoidable. This galaxy forgot us. The pause. You erased our history. Another pause. You whispered of our end. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. And then, you were wrong. Across the stars, something shifted. Empires that had stood unchallenged for centuries felt something they had not felt in generations. Fear, not of destruction, but of realization. Because the myth was no longer a myth. The legend was no longer a story. Humanity had returned. Not as survivors. Not as remnants. But as something far more dangerous. A force the galaxy had failed to understand the first time. And might not survive the second. The battle was over. But the war hadn't even begun. Across the shattered remains of Xanthara Prime's orbit, silence settled like a shadow. The wreckage of the Drek fleet drifted aimlessly, twisted metal, broken hulls, lifeless remnants of what had once been the most feared armada in the galaxy. And in the middle of it all, the human fleet remained, perfectly still, perfectly ordered, watching. They did not pursue the fleeing survivors. They did not secure the system. They did not communicate. They simply existed. And that was worse than anything the galaxy had witnessed before. Far from the battlefield, deep within the fortified chambers of the Galactic Council, panic spread, but not in the way one might expect. There were no alarms blaring. No frantic evacuations. No public declarations of crisis. Because the Council did not panic openly. It fractured quietly. Reports flooded in from every sector. Xanthar Prime lost. Drek Dominion assault force eradicated. Unknown fleet identified. Designation human. At first, many refused to believe it. They couldn't. The implications were too great. Too dangerous. Humanity was not supposed to exist. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Visual confirmations. Weapon signatures. Intercepted transmissions. All pointing to a single, impossible truth. The myth had returned. High Chancellor Vexer stood at the center of the council chamber, her gaze fixed on the holographic projection hovering above the assembly floor. The battlefield replayed in cold, clinical detail. Frame by frame. Strike by strike. Every movement analyzed. Every decision broken down. It didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. They didn't adapt, one of the strategists muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. They already knew what to do. No one argued. Because it was true. The humans had entered the battle with complete understanding of their enemy. Its tactics, its weaknesses, its patterns. As if they had faced the Drek before. Or something like them. Have they made contact? The question came from one of the elder representatives, his voice strained despite his effort to remain composed. Vexer didn't look away from the projection. We've sent 17 transmissions, she said. The pause. No response. Murmurs spread across the chamber. 17? On all frequencies? Encrypted channels included. All of them. Silence followed. Heavy. Unsettling. Because this wasn't how wars worked. Even the most hostile civilizations communicated, if only to threaten, to negotiate, to declare intent. But humanity said nothing. That silence, a reptilian delegate hissed softly, his eyes narrowing. It's deliberate. Vexer nodded once. Yes. And that was the problem. Because silence wasn't the absence of communication. It was a message. One far more dangerous than any declaration of war. Back at Xanthar Prime, the human fleet finally moved. But not outward. Not toward Council space. Not toward the fleeing remnants of the Drek. They moved inward. Toward the wreckage. Scavenging. Systematically. Methodically. Ships broke formation in precise intervals, descending upon the remains of the battlefield. Massive cargo vessels emerged from the rear lines, their hulls opening to receive debris, technology, anything of value. Nothing was wasted. Nothing ignored. They weren't just warriors. They were reclaiming. Observers watched in disbelief. They're harvesting the battlefield. For resources? For intelligence? For everything. It wasn't the act itself that disturbed them. It was the efficiency. The lack of hesitation. The complete absence of emotion. The Drek had been a terror, but they had been chaotic, destructive, driven by domination. The humans were different. They were controlled. Calculated. Patient. Like predators that didn't need to rush. Because they already knew the outcome. Send another message. Vexer's voice cut through the chamber. A few heads turned toward her. We've already. Send it again. Reluctantly, the communications division complied. A new transmission was prepared. Carefully worded. Respectful. Measured. This was not a demand. Not a threat. But an invitation. Unknown human fleet. The message began, broadcast across every channel available. The Galactic Council requests open communication. We seek understanding of your intentions. The signal was sent, echoing through space, reaching the silent formation of ships above Xanthra Prime. Everyone waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing. No acknowledgement. No response. No reaction at all. The human fleet continued its operations as if the message had never been sent. That's not possible, someone whispered. They received it. They had to. They just ignored it. Vexer slowly exhaled. Her fingers tightened slightly at her sides. This wasn't uncertainty. This wasn't confusion. This was something else. Something far more dangerous. They're not interested in talking, she said quietly. The realization spread across the room like a slow-moving shockwave. Then what do they want? No one answered. Because deep down, they already knew. Back on the bridge of the lead human vessel, the silence wasn't empty. It was controlled. Intentional. Deliberate. A figure stood at the center of the command deck, watching the final fragments of the Drek fleet being collected and processed. No celebration. No visible reaction. Just observation. A soft tone echoed through the bridge. Council transmission received, a synthetic voice reported. A brief pause. Do you wish to respond? The man didn't move. Didn't even blink. After a moment he spoke. Cold. Negative. Another pause. They're requesting communication. I know. Silence. Let them wait. Back in the council chamber, the absence of response said more than any words ever could. Because now, it wasn't just fear of what humanity had done. It was fear of what they would do next. And the worst part? They had no way to predict it. No way to influence it. No way to stop it. Because you couldn't negotiate with silence. You couldn't reason with something that didn't need to speak. And for the first time in its history, the Galactic Council realized something it had never considered before. They were no longer in control. The silence didn't last forever. It couldn't. Because eventually, even fear demands answers. 3 days after the fall of Xanthra Prime, the human fleet made its next move. Not an attack. Not an expansion. A message. It appeared without warning, cutting through every secured channel of the Galactic Council, bypassing encryption protocols that had never been breached before. No distortion. No delay. No origin point. Just a signal already inside their systems. The chamber froze as the transmission activated. No one spoke. No one moved. Because this was the first time humanity had chosen to speak. The display flickered. Then stabilized. A single figure appeared. Not an alien. Not an abstract projection. A human. Standing in a dimly lit command space, the background filled with cold metallic structures and faint tactical displays. There were no decorations. No symbols of power. No attempt at intimidation. And yet, the presence alone was enough. He stood still, hands behind his back, posture straight, expression unreadable. No introduction. No formal greeting. Just silence. The kind that forced everyone watching to pay attention. High Chancellor Vexer was the first to speak. Carefully. Measured. We are the Galactic Council, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. We request clarification of your intentions. The human didn't respond immediately. He studied them. Not as equals. Not as enemies. But as something being evaluated. Then he spoke. We know who you are. His voice was calm. Controlled. Devoid of emotion. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't respectful. Simply serious. A ripple moved through the chamber. Vexer held her ground. Then you understand why this situation requires communication. The pause. We understand everything. The answer came too quickly. Too confidently. As if there had never been any doubt. You've entered council-controlled space, another representative interjected. You've engaged a hostile force, yes, but without coordination, They were already dead. The interruption was immediate. Final. The chamber fell silent. The human's gaze didn't shift. They just didn't know it yet. Something about the way he said it? Not arrogant. Not aggressive. Just certain. That certainty was more unsettling than any threat. Vexer stepped forward slightly. You eliminated an entire Drek assault force. Yes. No hesitation. No exaggeration. Just acknowledgement. Why? The question lingered. Not because it was complicated, but because everyone in the chamber understood how important the answer would be. The human tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether the question itself was worth answering. They were in the way. A chill ran through the room. That was it. No strategic explanation. No moral justification. Just inconvenience. Vexer narrowed her eyes slightly. You expect us to believe this is coincidence? That you returned after centuries of absence, appeared in the middle of a galactic conflict, and your only reason was that they were in the way? The human watched her for a moment. Then, for the first time, there was a shift. Not in his expression, but in the weight behind his words. We did not return for them. Silence. Heavy. Focused. And we are not here for you. The implications hit immediately. If they weren't here for the Drek, and they weren't here for the council, then what? Then why are you here? Vexer asked. This time, there was no interruption. No immediate answer. The human turned slightly, as if glancing toward something beyond the frame, something only he could see. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but heavier. We are here because you forgot. Confusion spread across the chamber. Forgot what? Someone demanded. The human's gaze returned. Direct. Unblinking. Us. The word lingered. Simple. But loaded with meaning. Vexer frowned. That's not. Humanity disappeared. There were no records. No signals. No. You stopped looking. The interruption was calm. Controlled. But final. You labeled us extinct because it was convenient. The pause. You erased us because it was easier than asking why we were gone. The room shifted. Not physically, but mentally. Because now, this wasn't just about power. It wasn't just about war. This was about something else. Something older. We did not erase you, Vexer said carefully. We preserved what we could. But there was nothing left. There was always something left. The human stepped forward slightly. Just enough to change the dynamic. You just didn't care enough to find it. No one spoke. Because no one could. For the first time since the transmission began, there was emotion. Not anger. Not rage. But something colder. Something deeper. Disappointment. Vexer steadied herself. If that is true, then tell us. What is it you want? The question hung in the air. Everything depended on the answer. Survival. Extinction. The human didn't answer immediately. He studied them again. Every face. Every reaction. Every flicker of fear they tried to hide. We do not seek war. A collective breath. Tension, slightly released. But only slightly. Because something about the way he said it didn't feel like reassurance. The pause. Long enough to matter. But we will not be forgotten. The transmission cut instantly. No farewell. No negotiation. No continuation. Just silence. Back in the chamber, no one moved. Because they all understood the truth behind those words. This wasn't a declaration of peace. And it wasn't a declaration of war. It was something far more dangerous. A warning. And for the first time, the council realized something they had never considered before. Humanity didn't need to fight the galaxy. They didn't need to conquer it. They didn't even need to threaten it. Because simply by existing again, they had already changed everything. But its impact didn't. For hours, the council chamber remained in a state of uneasy silence. No one spoke openly. No one dared to draw conclusions too quickly. Because the truth was beginning to take shape. And it wasn't comfortable. They're not here for conquest. The statement came quietly, almost reluctantly. Vexer didn't look up from the data stream in front of her. No, she said. They're here for something else. Across the chamber, fragmented records were being pulled from ancient archives, files that hadn't been accessed in centuries. Dust-covered data logs. Corrupted transmissions. Partial histories labeled as unreliable. Everything related to humanity. Or what little remained. The results were inconsistent. Contradictory. Disturbing. Here, one of the analysts said, projecting a broken timeline into the center of the room. This is everything we have on humanity's disappearance. The holographic display flickered. Multiple versions of the same event appeared, overlapping, conflicting. One claimed humanity had destroyed itself in internal wars. Another suggested a catastrophic technological collapse. A third, barely supported by evidence, spoke of an external force, something that had targeted them specifically. None of them matched. None of them aligned. That's not history, Vexer said slowly. That's confusion. Or manipulation, another voice added. The word lingered. Uncomfortable. Because it implied something far worse than ignorance. Focus on the final transmissions, Vexer ordered. The room shifted as older data was isolated, signals flagged as incomplete, partially corrupted, dismissed long ago as irrelevant. A recording began to play. Static. Distortion. A voice. Human. Requesting immediate assistance, multiple systems under attack. This is not a localized conflict. Repeat, this is not contained. The audio cut in and out. We cannot hold. Defenses collapsing, civilian losses exceeding projections. Another break. More static. To any allied forces, if you receive this, respond. The transmission ended abruptly. Silence filled the chamber. That's not a myth, someone whispered. No, Vexer said quietly. It's a distress call. More recordings followed. Each one worse than the last. Fragments of a collapsing civilization. Reports of overwhelming enemy forces. Requests for aid sent across every known channel. And then, nothing. No responses, the analyst confirmed. Not from the Council. Not from any allied systems. That's not possible, another delegate snapped. The Council would have acted. Would it? The question cut through the room. Uncomfortable. Vexer turned slowly. Pull Council activity logs from that period. There was hesitation. Not because it was difficult, but because of what they might find. The data appeared. Organized. Undeniable. Council fleets were deployed, the analyst said carefully. Where? The pause. Away from human space. The realization hit like a physical force. No. They were redirected? Why would we? Because it wasn't our war, someone muttered. The words fell into the silence like a stone. Vexer's expression hardened. Keep going. Another file surfaced. This one marked with restricted access, sealed under emergency classification protocols. Authorization codes were bypassed. The contents revealed. A council directive. Centuries old. Clinical. Final. Priority shift, non-intervention. The room went still. Assessment. Human conflict categorized as unsustainable. Projected outcome. Total collapse. Recommendation. Preserve council resources. Avoid engagement. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. They asked for help. The words came from somewhere in the chamber, soft, disbelieving. And we did nothing. Vexer closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not in denial. Not in refusal. But in understanding. They didn't disappear, she said quietly. They were abandoned. The weight of that truth settled over the room like a shadow. Because now, everything made sense. The silence. The anger beneath their calm. The way they spoke, not with rage, but with certainty. They remember, Vexer continued. Every transmission. Every moment. Every time we chose not to act. Another recording began to play. This one clearer. Less distorted. But far more haunting. If anyone is listening, please. The pause. Heavy. We can't hold them back much longer. The voice faltered, then steadied. If this is the end. Static flickered. Then let it be remembered, we stood alone. The transmission cut. No one moved. No one breathed. Because in that moment, the myth of humanity finally died. And in its place stood the truth. They hadn't been monsters. They hadn't been reckless. They hadn't destroyed themselves. They had fought. They had endured. They had called for help. And the galaxy had turned away. Vexor opened her eyes. Slowly, deliberately. This isn't vengeance, she said. It's correction. The room remained silent. Because no one could argue. Far beyond the council chamber, aboard the human flagship, the past wasn't a mystery. It wasn't fragmented. It wasn't forgotten. It was recorded. Every call. Every loss. Every moment of silence where help should have come, but didn't. A figure stood before a dimly lit display, watching one of those final transmissions. Unmoving. Unshaken. But not untouched. They know now, a voice said quietly from behind him. Pause. Good. The response was calm. Cold. Final. Then they understand what happens next. Because this was never just about power. Never just about war. It was about something far more dangerous. Memory. And humanity never forgot. For the first time since humanity's return, the galaxy thought it understood them. That was the mistake. Because understanding was never the same as knowing. Far beyond council space, past the wreckage of battles and the silence of forgotten systems, the human fleet did something unexpected. They stopped moving. Not in retreat. Not in defense. But in orbit. Around a single world. A planet. Well, unremarkable. Lost on the edge of uncharted space. It wasn't marked as a strategic target. It wasn't rich in resources. It wasn't even listed as important in any galactic database. It was nothing. But to the humans, it was everything. The council watched in confusion as the fleet established a perimeter around the planet. Defense formations activated. Scanners deployed. Satellites launched into orbit. For the first time, the humans weren't advancing. They were protecting. Why that world? Someone asked. No one had an answer. Vexor leaned forward slightly, studying the live feed. There's something there, she said. A colony? Another voice suggested. No, she replied slowly. Something older. On the human flagship, the bridge remained quiet. But not empty. Every station was active. Every system synchronized. Every movement precise. And at the center, the same figure. Watching. Waiting. A new transmission appeared. This one wasn't sent to the council. It was broadcast globally. Unencrypted. Unstoppable. Every ship. Every system. Every listener. The same voice spoke again. But this time, it was different. You erased us once. The pause. Measured. You won't do it again. The projection shifted. The image changed. A map of the galaxy. Expanding. Zooming. Focusing. Until it revealed the planet they were orbiting. The surface. Not just terrain. Not just geography. But structures. Hidden beneath layers of time. Buried. Forgotten. Massive underground complexes. Ancient. Abandoned. And then, the truth began to unfold. Before the Drek. The human voice echoed across the transmission. Before the council. Before your empires. The image zoomed deeper. Into the planet's core systems. We built this. Shock spread across every listener. Built it? Someone whispered. Built what? The answer came immediately. Everything. The display expanded further, revealing structures that defied explanation. Advanced energy systems. Self-sustaining networks. Technology far beyond anything currently in use across the galaxy. This world was once ours. The revelation hit like a wave. Impossible, someone muttered. There's no record. You erased the records. The interruption was sharp, unforgiving, and then you moved on. Silence. The image shifted again, this time showing history. Not as the galaxy remembered it, but as it actually was. Humanity wasn't just another species. They were pioneers, builders, explorers, creators. They had spread across the stars, not to dominate, but to expand, to connect, to build. But something had changed. A signal, the threat, an unknown force. The first contact didn't come from us. The human voice said quietly, "It came for us." The display showed it. The beginning of the war. Not a conflict between empires. Not a political dispute. But a siege. Humanity wasn't fighting for power. They were fighting for survival. And they called for help. The transmission cut. Replaced by older recordings. Distorted. Fragmented. "We are under attack. Unknown entities, unrelenting. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." And then, the final piece. A response signal. From the council. But it wasn't a rescue. It was a rejection. Non-intervention approved. The room went silent. Because now, everything connected. Humanity had been fighting a war no one else acknowledged. Calling for help no one answered. Enduring a threat the galaxy refused to face. And when it all ended, they didn't just lose. They were forgotten. The human voice returned. But heavier now. "We survived what you abandoned." The pause. "We rebuilt what you ignored." The image shifted once more. Back to the present. The planet. The fleet. The silent orbit. "We did not return to conquer." A longer pause. "We returned to finish what you left behind." The galaxy had been preparing for war. Expecting domination. Fearful of destruction. But this wasn't that. This was something deeper. Something final. And for the first time, the council understood the truth. Humanity hadn't come back as invaders. They had come back as survivors. And survivors don't seek power. They seek resolution. The transmission ended. No warnings. No demands. No second chances. Just silence. But now, that silence meant something else. Because the galaxy finally knew. Humanity wasn't the beginning of the story. They were the part everyone else forgot. And the ending had already begun.